I assume I haven't heard from anyone in Hartford, but I assume that budget has been passed and it's all ready to go. So I thought we'd check in with my newest favorite state rep, and he is Representative Rob Sampson. Rob, welcome to WTIC. How you doing?
I am doing well, Todd. Thank you for the invitation. Very excited to join you.
Nice to have you here. So you're from Southington, is that right?
I am from Wolcott, actually. My district is all of the town of Wolcott and the western part of Southington.
Okay. I knew you were near there. And am I correct that the budget is all set and passed on to the governor?
I am sorry to disappoint you, but I am speaking to you from my living room, observing the beautiful sunshine that's outside.
I was wondering, how do you fit the whole I forget how many people are in the House. How many is it?
There are 151 members of the House.
151. You have a big living room to get them all in there to vote?
I wish I'd be more than happy to conduct the budget talks in my living room if it was absolutely necessary. I gassed up my car. I even pointed it towards the road last night.
Yeah.
But
you're all ready to head up there when you got the urgent call, but no call came? Did you get any calls today?
No call came. The Speaker has still not brought us in to debate any budget, the governor's, the Republican budget, or the mythical Democrat budget that I have not seen.
All right, so you're a Republican, though. You're in the opposition. Who would reach out to you?
I would probably hear from the leader of my caucus. That would be Representative Themis Claridis, leader of the House Republicans.
She speaks with little people like you directly?
Certainly, of course.
Okay. I didn't know what kind of... I haven't met her yet. I don't know what kind of attitude she has. If she's She seems like a really nice person and smart.
Yes. No, I think she's done a fine job as the leader of our caucus, and certainly on the issue of the state budget. And I'm delighted that you invited me on to kind of clear the air and maybe talk about some of the misconceptions that are being broadcast by some of my colleagues in the legislature and in the news media.
Like what? What kind of misconceptions have you been hearing?
Well, the first thing is that I keep hearing that the legislature has failed to do its job, and that we should be thrown out of office and things of that nature. And I couldn't agree more, except for the fact that many of us, the majority of us, don't have a control over whether or not we're there or not as we started the conversation. The only person that can make the decision that we are brought in to debate a budget, any budget, is the Speaker of the House. And he has failed to do so. The governor did his job to his credit back in February by offering a state budget. Unfortunately, that budget was, and I consider it untenable, and I think most of my colleagues do too, mostly because it included a huge cut to municipal aid that would have forced towns to raise property taxes pretty dramatically. So there's almost no support, if any, at all from Republicans or Democrats in the legislature. And since then, the only folks that have actually offered a budget since then are the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans. And my caucus, we offered our first budget sometime in the middle of April, and we've had to adapt as time goes on. That the situation changes because of the revenue figures coming in and the fact that you have to achieve even greater savings in other places as time progresses. So we've been ready to go in, debate the governor's budget, amend it if necessary, debate our budget any day of the week. I'd be happy to do that. I think that there's a chance that it even gets passed because of the makeup of the legislature. But there is a reluctance on behalf of the Speaker to bring us in there, I think partly because, A, they don't have their own budget product, and B, there is that tremendous fear, and I don't know if it's a personal fear of failure if a Republican budget becomes the law of the land in the state.
All right, so let me just put this in simpler terms. I think this is what you're saying. We're talking with Representative Rob Sampson. I think what you're saying is the Democrats are not fighting with Republicans behind the scenes to try to figure out a budget that could be passed. They're fighting amongst themselves or discussing amongst themselves, trying to figure out how to get the liberal wing of the party, however big that is, whether that's 99% or 95% or whatever the left wing is, to get the left wing to agree not to raise taxes. Is that maybe what's going on?
Well, I will say that I got elected first in 2010, same exact time as Governor Malloy, and over the past 7 years, I've watched two full state budgets pass, as well as some intermediate fix-it kind of budgets that happen in the second year. Those two budgets that are the law of the land that put us in the position that we are in today were passed without any Republican support whatsoever in the House or Senate. And that was by design. Those budgets were designed fully by the Democrat majorities to pass without Republican votes. They were,
in other words, so they could have exactly what they wanted. It was kind of a screw you to the idea of two-party rule.
Right,
and
there was no
they just wanted to ram stuff through.
Absolutely. When you have such extraordinary majorities that you do not need the minority party to comply or work with you in any way, you just put together whatever you want and you jam it through. And not only do you put the budget through in a way that only you approve of, despite their objections, even if they represent half the state, which I think the last election would indicate that just as many people voted for Republicans as Democrats, but their wishes are ignored when it comes to budget time. And there were other items contained in the budget purposefully to get Republicans on the record. They would slide things into the state budget, funding for breast cancer research, for instance, knowing full well Republicans.
So they could launch a war on women narrative or something.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is that Democrats misbehaved and they were punished for it. And during your time, exactly corresponding to your time in the House, or almost exactly, there's been a huge switch in the balance of power. That arrogance failed the Democrats.
That's correct. The session immediately preceding when I took office, there were 114 Democrats in the House and 37 in the and 37 Republicans.
Republicans, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then in the year that I got elected, there was quite a few Republicans were elected, but still 99 to 52, basically a 2-to-1 margin, and I believe it was 24 to 12 in the Senate. Same thing, 2-to-1. It is today 79 to 72 in the House, and it is 18 to 18 in the Senate, although the lieutenant governor does have the ability to break ties, and of course she will side with the Democrats in almost any case.
No, but it's very interesting when you think about, we're talking with Representative Rob Sampson, when you think about how responsive the electorate has been. You know, we tend to think of voters as being very entrenched party-wise, but what voters have been demonstrating is that they're watching what's going on, and they're not happy with what's been going on. They didn't like the big tax increases. They didn't like the one-sided approach to doing the budgets, perhaps. And now, is it fair maybe to say the Democrats don't know how to respond? They're in kind of a free fall in terms of political support.
Oh, yes, and I think the state is certainly on the precipice of electing Republican majorities in the House and Senate. I think they are terrified of that.
Isn't it funny, though? I mean, we're seeing kind of the same thing in Washington, that as the roles of parties get changed by the flux of the political marketplace, that they don't know how to adjust. It takes them time to find equilibrium in the new configuration of things.
Right. Well, the thing is that I could say a lot of things about the reasons why the Speaker has kept us from going into session, but the primary reason is that they operate on the notion that they must be able to pass any bill, whether it is a bill on any subject matter, regardless of whether we're talking about the budget or not, and certainly on the budget, with only their members' votes. They do not want to take the chance that they need 2 Republicans or 5 Republicans or 10 Republicans.
Because things are that polarized, or because they want to be that far off into the Netherlands of liberalism?
Well, I think it depends on the issue. There are certainly bills that are brought before the legislature entirely for political purposes where they would like nothing more than to be able to put Republicans on the record against insurance mandates that benefit women, for instance, because of the difference in our principles and our core values about how we choose to govern. And I think that's a large part of why they have this problem today. It's because they have managed to get into office based on the notion and concept of identity politics.
Well, why is that a problem? Identity politics usually works really well.
It's great for getting elected, but once you have to govern and you have a slim majority, trying to put all of these different groups and factions within your slim majority becomes that much more difficult. You have Democrats that are elected in inner city districts where they're more than happy to raise taxes because what they care about is making sure that the money keeps flowing to the people on entitlement programs in their districts, to make sure that the municipal aid shows up. These are the things that are important to them. You also have certain Democrats that represent more rural districts. Few freshman elected Democrats that serve on the east of the river, especially. They didn't create this problem, and I'm reaching out to them especially to say, if we ever do get a vote on a Republican budget, you're the kind of people who ought to come, because you don't want to vote for the tax increase. You can't vote for a tax increase, and it's about time you help us start running the state. But that's the problem they have, is that once they try and fix it for the Bridgeport legislator, they can't fix it for the more rural legislator someplace else, and therefore they do not ever reach the point where they have a majority.
Rob Sampson is with us. He's a Republican representative. He's been 7 years in Hartford. And let's take a little break, Rob, and then we can talk more about what's going on and what to expect. So no vote on a budget today. Will there be one this month? Will there be one this summer? We'll talk about that when we continue. Todd Feinburg, WTIC. That is not Representative Rob Sampson on guitar, but he's good at what he does nevertheless.
I actually do play a little Jimi Hendrix on the guitar.
Do you really?
Believe it or not. Not quite as well as the man himself.
Well, it takes a little practice, I guess. Isn't it extraordinary that people can be that good at stuff?
Yes.
I mean, where does he get the right to have been that talented? It's amazing. We're talking about where things are at with a budget. There's not one today. Do you have any sense, or even does a guy like you, who's a Republican and therefore in the minority party, and who's only been kicking around Hartford for 7 years, do you have any way of even knowing when there's going to be a vote?
Well, I think I'm above average in my ability to communicate with members of my own party, certainly party leadership, and I have a lot of friends on the other side of the aisle. I'll just say something very quickly. If you've been listening to me thus far, I probably have come across as one of the most unbelievably partisan people you'd ever run into in state government. And it's just not true. The fact is, I have the most independent voting record of any state legislator in our state assembly.
I think you sound great. I don't think there's anything to apologize for.
Yeah, the whole reason why I'm coming across the way I am, though, is I think it is so critically important that your listeners and the people across the state know exactly how we got into this problem and exactly how people voted. Because I have a lot of colleagues that'll come back to their district and they will sound like they are the most fiscal conservative people ever. They will tout themselves as such, and yet throughout the entire legislative session, they are constantly voting for things that are going to expand the size and scope and cost of government. When you say your colleagues, are you talking about your fellow Republicans, your caucus, or are you talking about Democrats, or both? I'm referring to the Democrat leadership in large part, although there are certain members of the Republican caucus that I would love to see act a little bit more fiscally conservative, but that's only from my perspective as someone who probably is the spokesperson for the most conservative wing of the Republican Party. Well, that's why you're here today. Because the more conservative you are as a Republican, the more you are a believer in the foundational principles. From my point of view, that's what that means, right? That you're for small government, you're for doing things in a way that does not let government become the oppressor, because government was supposed to be the protector of people against oppression, and that's what made our country unique at its very founding level. But we're far away from that. We're in state politics. That's right. It's the one thing that's being lost on both parties as time goes forward, the notion of limited constitutional government. And it's the one wish that I have, is that Republicans remember the traditional American values that this country began with. Okay, so you're a good communicator. You're in touch with people on both sides. What's your sense of what is going to happen this summer with a budget? I think the pressure is going to continue to mount, Todd. But I don't know there ever comes a point where they actually bring us in for a vote on a budget. The pressure will continue to mount on the Democratic leadership in the House. Is that what you're saying? That is correct, yes. But is that pressure not direct enough that they feel they have to really act? Do they feel like the blame is diffuse at this point, or that people aren't thinking about blaming anybody? What do you think the vibe is? Well, I think that their primary concern, which ought to be the fiscal sanity of the state of Connecticut going forward, has been put on the back burner in lieu of what are their chances of maintaining their majorities in the legislature. And I think that they are looking at a situation where any budget that comes forward and is voted on favorably is most likely going to happen on a party line vote, and they will be held accountable and responsible not only for all the damage that has come before, but also the pain that is going to be part of the solution.
Yeah. So what you're describing, Rob, I'm sorry, I'm going to rush you along because we only have 2 minutes left, but what you're describing is a Titanic type ship that is so big and so slow. It can see the iceberg that it's going to hit, but it can't turn quickly enough to avoid it. And that seems to be where momentum is taking the Democrats by. They are constitutionally committed to the idea that the rich need to pay more taxes, and they're not prepared to cause their voting base and their constituencies to cut spending. And that forces them into a self-destructive path. Is that right?
That is correct. And they've already made their choice by lieu of the fact that they knew on January 7th or whatever the day we began the legislative session that a budget was required. And it was required prior to the end of the legislative session on June 7th. And then they had another deadline at the end of the fiscal year and so on. And the self-proposed deadline of today, July 18th, as I said, I'm talking to you looking at the flowers on my back deck when I should be sitting in my seat casting a vote, yay or nay, on the state budget.
Well, this is a stunning moment that Democrats have found themselves in. I guess for people who want to see the changeover take place at the General Assembly and have Republicans in charge, that what you're describing is a perfectly constructed moment where it's not that Democrats don't want to do their job, it's that for them to vote on a budget means committing political suicide because it will contain tax increases and it will only have Democratic votes in support.
For the majority of them, I believe that is correct.
Wow.
Personally, I think that if they want to do the right thing for the state, they need to come to the table and recognize that there is a distinct possibility, a distinct possibility that we could pass the Republican budget offered by the House Republican caucus. You already have 72 votes committed in favor of it. You only need a handful more. And as I mentioned, there are several Democrat legislators who are first-termers who are not responsible. They did not cast the votes for the two huge Malloy tax increases that came before. They have a chance to do the right thing.
All right, Rob, I've got to hold you right there. What's your website?
RepSampson.com.
RepSampson.com. He is Representative Rob Sampson, Walcott, Southington. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks a million, Todd.